Final exam for 603 Resource Management, summer 2017, submitted by Cynthia Dixon. The case study that I chose to do my final exam on is Nepotism and the Jackson County School Board. The reason I chose this particular study, I was interested in it because over the years that I've been at North Forsyth, we've had about five couples that were hired in the same school in different positions. Additionally, we've seen a lot in politics concerning nepotism issues with the current Trump administration appointing family members. So I took interest in this case and wanted to dig a little deeper and find out more about the laws and how it will apply to the school system. Facts of the case: there was a superintendent who rewrites the nepotism policy for his district and creates the new position, Director of Innovation, at a salary double that of teachers. The superintendent's wife is hired for the newly created position, and the community expressed outrage, criticizing both the superintendent and the board. 1 week after the outrage, the wife resigned. As it relates to education, there are legal issues that needs to be considered, particularly with teacher rights. And so pulling from chapter 4 of the Principal's Guide to School Law on page 90, I realized that all principals must be aware of teachers' rights as they deal with employment issues. School districts possess broad authority in the establishment of job requirements or conditions of employment for school personnel. Courts have generally upheld school districts' rights to establish and enforce requirements as long as the requirements are reasonable, directly related to the school district's mission, and consistently applied. As it relates to nepotism and conflicts of interest, the following info is pertinent. Board policies prohibiting conflicts of interest and as a separate issue, nepotism, have been upheld by courts. Nepotism policies prohibit employment of relatives and in family members of employees. Conflict of interest policies prohibit employees from entering into a relationship with companies or organizations that conduct business with their school district either directly, meaning direct sales, or indirectly, meaning consulting or contracting for direct sales. The additional information that I would have needed that might have a different bearing on the case would be what was the hiring process for this particular district? Who were the other candidates that applied for the position and were they more qualified? Did the superintendent create the position solely for the purpose of hiring his wife? Well, as I probed into this case study, I interviewed my principal, our human resource manager, and a Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board member. My interview with the board member. The first question was, how much influence did the superintendent have on board policy? He stated that a superintendent can come before the board and make recommendation, but it's ultimately the board that approves it. The Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board has a policy committee made up of 3 to 4 members. A superintendent couldn't just change policy. Before a policy can be changed, it has to go through a process. Policy recommendations are discussed, checked for legal ramifications, and then go out for public, um, out to the public for an open vote. We are a really engaged board, he says, and if someone brings a recommendation, we would ask a lot of questions. My second question is, who calls attention to the board when there are policies that are out of date? He said attention to out of date policies can come from internal or external sources. The district's attorney and her team should be conscious of what needs to be changed. And sometimes recommendations have come from someone in the community or someone within the Winston-Salem Forsyth County school personnel. My next question, since you have been serving on the board, have you seen any issues that may be borderline unethical as it relates to nepotism or cronyism? And his response, no, I haven't seen any. And I can honestly say that if any nine of us see any issues, we would immediately bring it to the school board and request a change. The next question, how does the board handle questionable or unethical behavior by a superintendent? And he stated if we ever had to deal with any issues with the superintendent, we would deal with it swiftly. Since this would be a personnel issue, the board would deal with it in a closed session. Based on policy and the impact, we would make a decision accordingly. My last question for the board member was, how does the board handle the community when there is an outrage? He stated that the board would meet with them and hear their concerns, and every effort is made to create a win-win. And if there is a valid concern that can't be changed, accommodations are made from a different perspective. My next interview was with our principal, and my first question was, what is your definition of nepotism? And she stated that it's the hiring of family members to hold positions and hiring them because they are family rather than because of qualifications. My next question, when does nepotism exist? And she stated, I've never been in a situation that it exists. However, in the district, you can't be the supervisor and evaluator of someone you are related to. So she went on to say, for example, I can't hire my mother to work in the office, even though she would be great because I would be directly supervising her. Then I stated to her, the reason I chose this subject is because we've had at one given time 4 sets of spouses. 2 years ago, we had a couple on staff that, with one spouse being the curriculum coordinator and the other the assistant principal. Was that a thin line? And she states it could have been, but since we were within the guidelines, it was not an issue. The assistant principal would not have directly evaluated her, but rather the principal. Thus, it would not be an issue. She went on to state that our former superintendent had a wife at our school that was the director of guidance, and I actually remember that. Um, she was an awesome director, and no one considered it an issue. She was hired on her own merit. So she went on to say there is no issue with hiring a husband and a wife. There are protocols for hiring that should be followed, and if you follow those protocols, your actions should not be questioned. I don't see any issue with hiring a husband and wife to teach at your schools. Your process for interviewing should be number one, post the job. Number two, schedule interviews based on resumes. Number three, set up committees to do the interviewing. Number four, do the interview. Five, committee makes the recommendations. And six, principal picks the candidate. In the summer, I may interview by myself, she states, simply because no one else is here. Again, having a process that you follow protects you from questions and suspicions. If you have a process and you document your process as to why one candidate was chosen over the other, then you have notes as to why you made the decision that you made. A final interview was with our human resource manager, and I asked her some of the same questions. First question, what is your definition of nepotism? And she states, when you hire an immediate family member into a permanent position that you supervise. Number two, when does nepotism exist? Again, according to our policy, when there is a direct supervision of a family member. My third question, how much influence does the superintendent have on board policy? She states, superintendents can make recommendations, but the board approves. My fourth question, who calls attention to the board when there are policies that are out of date? She states, our legal department closely monitors our policies. And my last question for her, do you recall any cases where the district faced unethical issues? And she states, I've been in my position for 17 years, and since I have been the HR manager, we've never had any issues. We've had anywhere between 30 to 40 married couples in the district who work at the same school. The only problem that it may cause is sometimes uh, is in times of needed leave. For example, if there's death in the family, instead of one staff person out, there would be two. Another example, when someone moves or relocates, instead of losing one employee, you would have lost two. All right, so then I went and I actually looked at our nepotism policy um, for our district. And so it broke down the assignment of personnel, the definition of the immediate family, and the assignment of students. And so, as it relates to personnel, it states nepotism, the assignment of member of the family member, immediate family to supervise and or evaluate, which is basically what my principal and the HR manager had said in their interviews, that it had to do with direct supervision. And then, as it relates to immediate family, for the purpose of this policy, members of the immediate family include spouses, children, stepchildren, um, grandchildren, parents, grandparents, brothers, sisters in laws, uncles, and aunts. And then the policy continued with the assignment of students, stating that teachers cannot teach their children. So that's our policy. And after that, I did my research with scholarly journals. These journals and articles were very interesting. Um, the first one I read says nepotism is not illegal. It talked about that in the private sector, hiring relatives is not illegal. However, in the public sector, if you work for government, there may be some laws about conflict of interest or hiring relatives at a certain level, and that you would need to check your state and local laws if you work for the government. And then this public sector issue. Um, uh, is really, really important. As I looked at the next case, Trump names son-in-law Jared Kushner as senior advisor, and his appointment raises some questions of nepotism. So in this particular journal article, it talks about the president naming his son, Jared Kushner, as a senior White House, and then it discusses how there was a lot of questions raised going up against the 1967 law about nepotism. And then the Democrats asked the Justice Department to look closely at the legal issues. And there was some concerns about conflict of interest. But then it was pointed out that in the Democratic administration of Bill Clinton, that he appointed First Lady Hillary Clinton as the chair of his health care reform package in 1983. But the lawyer denied that there were any violations of the nepotism law. The third journal article I looked at called Separated at Work. Can you keep spouses from working together? So I had a particular interest in this because, again, I have at my school four couples who work in our school. And this article says that some employees have charged that a no spouse rule violates their constitutional right to marry. And courts are more likely to uphold reasonable rules, such as one that prohibits employees from supervising their spouses, than a broad one that bans all relatives from every department. And it goes on to say that firing someone simply because they have married someone within the organization could possibly fall under illegal discrimination. And then again, it closes out saying, when considering an anti nepotism or no spouse rule for your business, balance the benefits, such as avoiding favoritism, with the risk of legal challenges or harm to employee morale. The fourth journal I looked at was Marriage Traps in the Workplace. Nepotism rules make it harder for spouses to work in the public sector. And so this journal article says that policies that prohibit family members from holding positions too closely related to each other have been implemented by a growing number of employers, particularly in the public sector. And with more women now in the workforce, there's a greater probability that people are likely to meet their spouses at work. Anti-nepotism rules have fostered more fairness in the workplace, but they have created new problems as well. In this particular journal, it cited a case in 1984. There were two employees that got married. 2 weeks after marrying, the wife was asked to leave the force. They sued the city on the grounds that anti-nepotism policy denies the fundamental right to marry protected by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Well, they actually lost the case, and the court pointed out that proof of discriminatory intent is necessary for an equal protection claim. And I thought that was very interesting. Um, And then we had another one journal that I looked at. This research looked at relatives in the same university, and um, and actually the research was done in Italy, and it opened up stating that many countries prohibit hiring relatives in the same university. That nepotism is a form of favoritism. However, there are benefits to nepotism as opposed to contrary opinion, and the journal stated that nepotism can be compatible with equal or greater productivity by relatives. Higher productivity can be the consequent of favored treatment outside of appointment and promotion decisions. Based on their concluding research, there's a need for reflection on the possibility of eliminating all restrictions and considering the practices and attitudes that inhibit co presence of relatives in the same university. My last study is preferential treatment and empirical study in the education sector of Pakistan. This was also an interesting journal, and this research aimed to investigate the impact of preferential treatment, nepotism and favoritism on job satisfaction and turnover intentions of employees. Um, the article defined nepotism as the abuse of office in support of family members and went on to state that this word was used for popes who conferred privilege to their relatives. Favoritism is very common and reduces cost of induction process in organizations, and organizations in developing countries follow nepotism in order to decrease their cost of hiring. And so, in order to get maximum output, management must ensure induction on the basis of merit, knowledge, and talent. In the research, data was collected from 200 academic staff of various private universities through self administration's questionnaires. The conclusion was that there was an upward trend in job satisfaction and employees' turnover intentions with the hiring of relatives. What I learned the definition of nepotism. I learned our district's policy on nepotism. I learned the different ways nepotism is handled across various industries, like the public sector versus the private sector. I learned how to avoid questionable practices, as my principal gave me some good advice. And then I learned the importance also of protecting teachers' rights. How would this information be helpful to my future career? Administrations Administrators are actively involved in the hiring process. Thus, I will be informed on how to handle cases of spousal employment. I endeavor to incorporate the practices my principals share to follow a process and be consistent in that process. This concludes my presentation, and I want to take time to thank Dr. Summer for a phenomenal semester and thank her for teaching me on law and finance. It's been an enjoyable time, and I do appreciate you imparting knowledge and wisdom into my life and helping me to prepare to be successful as an administrator.